Hi, and welcome to this month's legislative update. In my practice, I consistently see changes to legislation, making it easier for members of the military and their spouses to practice their chosen professions when they have to relocate. And the requirement to relocate is typically out of the control of military personnel. It can come on short notice, and it tends to occur much more frequently than in the general population. So there's a great desire to make it easier for personnel and their families to adjust to these moves. And one example of making things easier came earlier this year with President Biden's signing of the Veterans Auto and Education Improvement Act, which in part requires recognition of a state issued professional license in additional states under certain conditions. Essentially, the act states that military personnel and their spouses who are licensed in any profession, excluding law, except that one, can automatically practice in another jurisdiction when they are relocated pursuant to valid military orders. And the conditions are that the license must be and must remain in good standing with the board that issued the license. And anywhere else the individual is licensed in that same profession, that license also, all those other licenses must remain in good standing as well. Additionally, the licensee must agree to abide by the Relocation States Practice Act and that relocation board regulations. And generally, they have to submit to the relocation board's jurisdiction authority as you will. Military personnel or their spouse must provide the board with a copy of the relocation orders, and their right to practice in that state is limited to the period or the duration of time of those orders. There are several provisions of the law that are unclear and are subject to interpretation in my mind. First, the law states that the original license, quote, shall be considered valid at a similar scope of practice by the relocation state, but it fails to clarify what that actually means. So that is, should the relocation state board issue a separate license, or should it simply recognize the licensee's right to practice without that board issuing a license? Or does the board have to engage in some other process to recognize this? Also, the law doesn't specify what entity is authorized to interpret what similar scope of practice means. Now, I would think that the relocation state board would be the one to determine if the scope is similar, but I'm not the one making the rules, clearly. Also, good standing is a term that has always been subject to debate, and the new law doesn't really offer any guidance as to what that means. So from a legal perspective, there are federalism questions that could potentially challenge this law, and those would undoubtedly focus on the ability of the federal government to impose these requirements on the states. And we'll have to see how that shakes out and whether additional guidance is offered, which might assist those state boards in implementing this new law. And as always, we'll keep you updated if we can, so stay tuned and thanks for listening.